There is a forest in the Pacific Northwest where the trees grow so close together that even at noon, the ground is swallowed in a greenish gloom. The locals call it the Hushwood, not because it is silent, but because the silence there feels listening. Hunters avoid it after dark. Trail cameras have come back blank, their memory cards wiped clean except for a single frame of pale drifting light. Dylan Smith did not know any of this. He was 28, newly single, and desperate to prove to himself that he was still the kind of man who could sleep on dirt and call it freedom. He drove his rusted Ford Ranger to the Hushwood trailhead on a Friday in late October, packed a tent he hadn't used since college, and hiked 3 miles in before the sun began to bleed through the canopy. Perfect. No service, no Karen. Just me, the trees, and whatever that smell is. The smell was sweet and fungal, like rotting honey. Dylan ignored it. He built a small fire, opened a can of chili, and ate with his back against a fallen log. By 9 o'clock, the fire had died to embers. The cold crawled into his bones. He zipped himself into his sleeping bag and stared up through the tent's mesh window at the sliver of sky visible between the branches. That was when he saw the first orb. It was not a flashlight, not a drone, not lightning bugs. It floated about 30 feet above the tree line, the size of a grapefruit, and it glowed with the color of a dying star, amber at the edges, white hot at the core. It made no sound, but as Dylan watched, the orb began to drift downward, slowly, deliberately, like something that had spotted him. What the hell? He wanted to move, he wanted to scream, but his body had become a stranger to him. His limbs felt weighted, his tongue thick and useless. The orb descended through the tent wall as if the nylon were made of smoke. It hovered 6 inches above his exposed forearm, the one he'd rested outside his sleeping bag because the night had turned strangely warm. The light touched his skin. It did not burn, it tasted. He felt a pressure deep in his marrow, a sensation like someone pressing a thumb into a bruise that hadn't formed yet. Then the orb flickered once, twice, and shot back up through the trees, vanishing into the black. Dylan lay there until dawn, too terrified to close his eyes. When the sun finally filtered through the tent, he examined his arm. There was a small red dot where the orb had touched him, no bigger than a pinprick. He told himself it was a mosquito bite. He packed his camp in 40 minutes and drove home without looking in the rearview mirror. 3 weeks passed. Dylan returned to his routine. Data entry at a logistics firm, microwave lasagna, reruns of a sitcom he'd stopped laughing at years ago. The red dot on his arm faded to a pale scar. He almost convinced himself it had been a dream. Then, on a Tuesday morning while shaving, he noticed the bump. It was just above his left elbow, exactly where the orb had touched him. A small, flesh-colored mound, no larger than a pea. He poked it. It felt firm like cartilage, not painful, not itchy, just there. Marcus, it's probably a cyst. My mom had cysts. You just get them drained. Then go to a doctor, genius. Don't call me at 7 a.m. to diagnose your lump. It's not a lump. It's a bump. There's a difference. There really isn't. Dylan did not go to a doctor. He went to work. He sat in his cubicle and typed numbers into spreadsheets, and every few minutes, he found himself touching the bump. It felt warmer than the rest of his skin. Not feverish, alive. By the end of the first week, the bump had grown to the size of a marble. By the second week, a golf ball. His sleeve began to strain against it. At night, he dreamed of the forest, not the Hushwood he had seen, but a deeper version of it, where the trees had faces and the roots moved like worms through black soil. His coworker Lisa was the first to notice something wrong. "Dylan, you look gray. Are you sleeping?" "Fine, just a cold." "Your arm, is that a tumor?" He pulled his sleeve down so fast he heard a thread snap. Lisa stepped back. She didn't say anything else, but she avoided him for the rest of the day. By the time Dylan got home, the bump had grown again. It was now the size of a tennis ball, and the skin over it had turned translucent, like soap. Beneath the surface, something moved. He locked his bathroom door. He rolled up his sleeve, and for the first time, he let himself really look. Inside the bump, inside his own arm, was an orb. Smaller than the one in the forest, but unmistakable. It pulsed with a soft, sickly light, and every time it pulsed, Dylan felt a wave of nausea and something else. Hunger. Not for food, for darkness, for solitude, for the damp smell of rotting wood. No, 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 get out of me. He grabbed a steak knife from the kitchen. He pressed the tip to the bump. The moment the blade touched his skin, the orb inside flared so bright that Dylan screamed and dropped the knife. When his vision cleared, the bump had grown again. It was now the size of a grapefruit, and his entire arm had begun to change color, a pale, waxy white, like a mushroom stem. He called Marcus that night, hysterical. "Marcus, you have to come over. Something is wrong. Something is really, really wrong." Okay, I'm coming. Just stay on the phone." "What happened?" "The orb, the one I told you about. It's in me. It's growing. I can feel it thinking." "Thinking? Orbs don't think, Dylan. You're having a psychotic break. I'm calling an ambulance." But Marcus never made that call, because through the phone, he heard a sound that stopped his heart. It was a wet, splintering crack, like someone stepping on a frozen branch buried inside a raw turkey. Then Dylan screamed. Not a fearful scream, not a painful scream. It was the sound of a man who had just realized his body was no longer his own. "Marcus, it's opening. My arm, the bump is..." The line went dead. Marcus arrived 12 minutes later to an empty apartment. The door was still locked from the inside. The windows were frosted with a fine, luminous dust. The air smelled of honey and decay. And on the kitchen floor, where Dylan should have been, there was only a dark, spreading stain and a single pale orb, no bigger than a marble, floating 3 feet above the linoleum. Dylan did not die. That is the worst part of this story. He became. His body collapsed inward like a burning house, but his consciousness, his memory, his fear, his desperate, clawing sense of self poured into the orb that had birthed from his ruined arm. He felt his legs dissolve into light. His arms became frequencies. His mouth became a wound that could not close. "Someone help me, please. I can feel everything. I can feel the trees. I can feel the other ones. They're coming. The orb shot through the ceiling, through the roof, through the cold October sky. Dylan, or what remained of him, screamed without lungs, wept without eyes, and flew. The wind carried him west. The stars blurred past, and deep in the hollow of his new, terrible existence, he understood where he was going. He returned to the Hushwood. The orb floated down through the same trees, past the same fallen log, until it reached the forest floor. There, something ancient and patient welcomed him. The soil opened, the mycelium beneath, a vast, intelligent network that had been spreading for centuries, reached up with threads finer than hair and pulled him down. For 3 days, the orb pulsed beneath the leaf litter. On the 4th day, a stalk pushed through the soil. Pale, bioluminescent. It grew fast, faster than any natural fungus, until it stood 2 feet tall, its cap the color of spoiled milk. It was a mushroom, but not like any mushroom a biologist has ever classified. Its gills glowed faintly amber, and if you pressed your ear to its stem on a quiet night, you could hear a faint, high-pitched whimper. Dylan's last human sound trapped in the cellulose. Then the mushroom began to dry, its cap curled upward, its stalk cracked like old parchment. And from the gills, a cloud of spores began to drift, millions of them, each no larger than a grain of salt, each carrying a fragment of Dylan's stolen memory. The spores floated up through the trees. They caught the moonlight, and one by one, they began to glow. The first new orb was no bigger than a freckle, but it pulsed. It hovered. It drifted deeper into the Hushwood, searching for warmth, searching for skin. The second orb followed, then the third, then 100 more, rising from the dying mushroom like ash from a fire that has forgotten how to stop burning. Today, the Hushwood has more orbs than ever. Hunters still avoid it after dark. Trail cameras still come back blank, save for one final image. A pale drifting light, shaped roughly like a man, hovering just at the edge of the frame. If you ever camp there, if you ever feel a warm pressure on your arm in the middle of the night, do not look up. Do not run. Do not breathe. Just close your eyes and pray that the spore finds someone else. Because the forest is patient. The mycelium remembers. And somewhere beneath the soil, in a mushroom that will never fully die, Dylan Smith is still screaming. And now, the orbs are looking for company.
The next file is already available, if you're willing to keep watching.